Okay, great. So Ansible is now installed and good to go. So this is actually a good point for us to take a snapshot from my experimentation. Um, Configuring and running Ansible was the most error-prone part of this. So we'll actually go ahead and just take another snapshot. Installed Ansible. And one more. Installed Ansible. Perfect. Okay. All right. So now what we're going to do is we will go back to our instructions. And the next thing we need to do is start configuring Ansible. So we are going to cd into our Ansible directory. And we're going to need to edit, first we'll edit the inventories. So I have Vim installed, I think so. Inventories / local development. Perfect, okay. And so what this does is it tells Ansible the different, ooh, the blue is hard to read, that's okay. This tells us the different services that we're going to be accessing. So this is the web server over here on the right. And so the web server, which provides the database and the website, will reach itself locally. So we'll leave the Ansible connection as local, but the development shell is actually this other computer. So we need to tell it to access it using SSH, and our host name will be 192.168.2.3, and that's the IP of the shell server. So we'll go ahead and right quit. Oh, by the way, if you haven't used Vim, what I did right there, to start typing, I hit I, and that puts you into insert mode. And then I hit escape when I was done typing. And then I hit escape one more time and did colon WQ, and that'll write and quit. Okay, perfect. We'll go ahead and do that same thing over here, and I'll do a better job of walking through Vim. And then I'll go into Ansible. Okay, we'll do Vim inventories / local development, or actually, I think is Nano installed. Let's do it in Nano. So if you're not familiar with Vim, let's go ahead and use Nano. It's a little easier to use. You can just type like normal, and then hit Control X to exit. So what we're going to do here is now this is the shell server. So we need to tell it where to access the web server. So that'll be SSH, and then 192.168.2.2, and then same thing down here. SSH 192.168.2.2. Beautiful. And then I'll hit Control X, and then I'll hit Y, and then just enter. Okay, perfect. So now we've set that up. The next one we need to do is we'll edit the group vars for local development, okay, which is this YAML file. We need to change this Ansible user, so I'm going to make it Pico, and Pico here. And then if your users aren't the same, you need to come and change this here, but they're the same for mine, so I'm going to do that. Okay, so I'll go ahead, exit out, and then over here we'll do the same thing. Whoops. Okay. All right. So now we've done that. We've set up, we've configured Ansible. Now comes the fun part where we actually get to run Ansible. So we're going to copy this command right here, shell only, for the shell. The shell needs to be run before the web because the web actually depends on the shell for loading problems. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So just paste that in there, and then we got to change a couple things. So first, we're going to change, we'll replace the web host name. We're going to replace that with 192.168.2.2. Come in here, same thing, 192.168.2.2. I don't believe we actually need to do the shell host name for the shell server, but we'll go ahead and do it anyways. 2.3. And then same thing right here. 192.168.2.3. Perfect. Okay, and now we'll go ahead and run this. And that's all we need to do there. We'll type in our sudo password, and hopefully this works. All right. It's running, so I'll go ahead and pause it, and I'll continue the video if anything weird happens. Your machine should restart. Hopefully it'll be okay. So let's see what happens. Okay, that took a little bit, but we're done. All right, so we actually have successfully ran Ansible, and we now have our problem server set up. So let's go ahead and take a quick tour. First of all, the very first thing you're going to notice, let me see if I can type sudo. Sudo, who am I? Oh, okay, this is what we'll do. We'll do su pico. It's good. It's going to ask for your password, and we're going to go ahead and type pico. Authentication failure. Okay, let's do that again. Su pico vagrant. Vagrant. Vagrant, like that. That is our new password. For some reason, it changes that when it does the Ansible playlist. I don't know why. Pretty annoying. So we'll go ahead. I'll just drop back down to that other shell. We're going to go ahead. You'll see our host name has also changed as well. I'm going to go ahead and change that with the password program. So just type PASSWD, change your password. Your current password will be vagrant again, and I'm just going to change it back to Pico. I must choose a longer password. Okay, thank you. Pico shell. Pico shell. Okay, for whatever reason, it did that. Kind of annoying. I don't believe it does that on the web shell. Pretty annoying, but now we have our password back, so we can now we're back to normal. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a little look. Let's see. So let's go into the /home directory. That's weird. Before we had permission to see the /home directory. Well, let's go ahead and see what's going on there. Sudo ls/home. Okay. Well, we don't see it now, but what's happened here is that it's actually created a bunch of, it's made a bunch of changes. One of those changes being that the /home directory is now no longer readable by anybody. Nobody can read it except for the owner, which is root. So the reason it did that is so that when people start signing in, it's going to create their account. So for example, when we get the web server running, we will log in. I'll make an account called Ktrio3, which is my username on everything. And we'll see that it will create a home directory here on the SSH server for us called Ktrio3. And that'll only be readable for me. And so that's the whole idea here, is that we have this kind of set up. So let's go into root. So you'll see that it created a couple of other things for us. So we see PicoCTF is still there, but it also created things like the PicoCTF bundles, PicoCTF debs, PicoCTF environment, all of which should not be readable to us. We would need to run sudo, or maybe they're just empty. Okay, they might just be empty. Okay, that should not be readable. Okay, maybe it is. Okay. That's fine. Oh, it might be because we're Pico. We might have permissions to do that. Okay, don't worry about that. Yeah, I guess everybody has read, write, or write. They just don't have execute permission. They have read and they don't have write permission. They have read and execute. Okay, that's fine. All of that shouldn't be anything sensitive. What about, let me check real quick, this / PicoCTF. Let's see what's in here. Okay, so this is all only readable. That's interesting. We may want to make sure, so this is what I'm kind of wondering, is if we'll need to make sure that we like make the problems directory not readable by anybody. Currently it looks like, yeah, so this is currently, it looks like is readable by anybody. So we'll want to walk, when we go to install, we'll either want to, I think we can remove these at this point, but we'll definitely want to lock this down. These should not be readable by anybody but Pico, most likely. Okay, so we'll make a note of that. We'll definitely want to test and make sure that we don't have any obvious permission errors like that. Okay, so now I think there's also another Ansible we can run when we're actually ready for deployment. So we don't have to worry about that. That should fix some of that probably. So let's go ahead and take a look at the problems directory. Okay. Ooh, permission denied. So the problems directory is set up correctly. You can't read any of the problems. So that is good. You can see here we have some here. So if you remember from the PicoCTF, the way it's set up is you have everybody gets assigned a different folder based on instances. So for example, buffer overflow 1 is the name of the challenges, and then there is 2 instances, instance 0 and instance 1, and then a random string there so that people don't guess it and just go into it. So this prevents people, this allows us to have different flags for different contestants. And so we can increase the number of instances for each challenge to make it so that people can't share flags as easily. In order to share flags, they would need to make sure they actually had the same instance of the problem. Which is kind of nice if you're doing this for a classroom experience, which is what Pico is, kind of designed for and kind of what we're going for. So let's go ahead and we'll cd into /problem /buffer overflow. cd /problem / okay. Since I can't do autocomplete there. And here you can see that we're actually in the buffer overflow. We'll see we have our permission. The files are owned by the HackSports user, which is the user that kind of runs all these services. You may recognize that name. That is the library that's used to create all these problems that we'll be getting familiar with in a minute. And then it's owned by a particular group. So you need to, in order to do this buffer overflow, you need to take advantage of this vulnerability, which, as you can see, has the sticky bit set on the group, so that if you exploit this vulnerability, you'll run it with the buffer overflow group, and that'll set it up. And so if you get a shell, you can then read this flag file here. Okay. And so that's the idea there, is we have these all separated so that you can't just, read the flag or something like that. So that's a good overview real quick of the system, kind of what we've set up there. So now what we need to do is, so at this point, actually, you can, if you just wanted to do the problem server, that's really all you need to develop the challenges. So for example, the vuln service is running. It is a little trickier since we don't know the like ports that it's running on. It would take a little, like you'd have to look up the port, see what it's running on. What command is that? I don't remember. 1, 2, 18, open list running ports. Let's see, just tell me the command. Well, I guess you need, okay, let's just try this one. See if that works. Okay, perfect, that worked. So if we look here, these Zynet-D are probably the buffer overflow programs. So one of these would probably be the port. So there is a little bit more work. So it's probably worth setting up the web server just so you don't have to do some of this guesswork or dig into the code to figure out what they did. Like there's a database that has all this stuff. But yeah, so theoretically though, you could just run your problems here. So I'll go ahead and we're going to end this video here. And then we'll go ahead and do Ansible over on the web server and then take a look at what that's set up in the web server environment.